Welcome to RiseFuel, where underdogs rise, justice wins, and every story reminds you, no one stays powerless forever. If you love courtroom twists, neighborhood drama, and real-feeling battles for what's right, you're in the right place. ***. She came storming across my yard like a tornado, armed with a ruler, shouting as if I were opening a nightclub instead of tapping a single wooden post into the lake bed before I could even blink. She was already dialing the cops, screaming something about tampering with community waters, despite the fact that I was standing squarely on my own land, putting up a small fishing dock I'd dreamed about for years. Just like that, my peaceful spring morning morphed into a full-blown HOA circus, complete with nosy neighbors gawking, camera phones out, and threats of fines flying. Tell me, has your HOA ever gone full lunatic over something this innocent? Drop your war stories in the comments and let me know if you've ever met someone this unhinged. See, I work in lake restoration. I live and breathe boundaries, permits, and water loss, so trust me when I say I know exactly where my land begins and ends. That morning I was finally making my dream dock a reality, with sunlight dancing off the water like glitter and reminding me why I fell for this place in the first place. I had just hammered in the first post, only 6 inches deep, when I heard rapid, furious footsteps charging across my lawn like I'd set the lake on fire. "Stop right there," barked Lynette Boyd, a mid-50s tyrant who somehow managed to be both pint-sized and petrifying. Gray bun coiled like barbed wire and HOA rulebook raised like she was about to knight someone or decapitate me. Trailing behind her like a loyal hound was Dale Ramsey, balding, early 60s, filming every second like he thought he was directing Making a Murderer, Neighborhood Edition. These two had crowned themselves the neighborhood's morality police, treating my dock like a ticking bomb. "What in the hell do you think you're doing, Porter?" Lynette shrieked, pointing at my lonely post like it was radioactive. "That's community water. You're violating at least 3 lake covenants," she declared, waving her book like a courtroom drama extra while Dale orbited us with his phone, whispering, documenting evidence like it was a sacred chant. I calmly set my hammer down, wiped my gloves, and smiled the way you'd smile at toddlers demanding to arrest clouds. People were stopping mid-walk, phones up, eyebrows raised. Even the mailman paused. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson stood on her balcony filming, her face reading, "Here we go again." "Good morning, Lynette." "Dale," I said, pulling from my back pocket a crisp set of official documents stamped with bright red city seals. "I've got a valid permit, and just to refresh your memory, this lake sits entirely inside my deeded land." Her face froze. Like someone told her taxes were illegal, she stared at my paperwork like it was a foreign script, then looked from me to the post, trying to connect dots that didn't exist. "You are claiming the lake is yours," she gasped, her voice rising to DEFCON 1. "That's absurd. This lake has been communal since 1995. You're destroying our landscape, our peace," she wailed, while Dale bobble-headed so hard he nearly lost his glasses, zooming his camera into my face like it would catch a confession. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so deranged to people treating me like a Bond villain for wanting to fish off my own land. Lynette whipped out her phone like Judge Judy's stunt double, checked her reflection is really, and smoothed her hair before dialing, as if looking fabulous was vital to her emergency HOA intervention. Her face red and neck veins pulsing like piano wires, she threatened, "If you don't stop this now and remove that thing from our lake, I'm calling the police." I shrugged, grabbed my second post, and replied, "Feel free, Lynette, but I'm not stopping that broker." Her face went from red to plum as she stabbed at her screen like she was trying to break through to the Pentagon. Dale filmed it all, convinced this was the Dateline episode that'd finally take me down. The funniest part was how Dale followed Lynette like a backup singer, nodding at every word, pulling out a notepad like he was Mulder from the X-Files, even producing a tape measure and solemnly measuring the distance between my dock and the shore, 14.7 inches from the established waterline, he announced like he'd uncovered Watergate. When Lynette finally dialed 911 and Dale stood behind her like Spielberg in gym socks, it turned into a surreal skit, 2 grown adults filming their own citizens' arrest of a guy installing a fishing dock. The cop arrived 15 minutes later, tall, composed, and clearly familiar with HOA tantrums. Before the cruiser fully stopped, Lynette practically sprinted toward him, breathlessly unloading how I was wrecking the community's ecosystem with my one-man construction crime. "Wave, he has no permits. He's violating city ordinances," she cried. Dale, of course, filmed every second, trying to catch dramatic angles like he was live-streaming a hostage situation. The officer didn't flinch. He asked, "Permit?" and I handed it over. He flipped through it, tread stamps, clear boundaries, legal clarity. Meanwhile, Lynette paced in circles, muttering, "This can't be legal, there has to be a mistake." Finally, the officer looked up and delivered a blow better than any I could have scripted. "Ma'am, Mr. Porter has all the required permits. According to these documents, the lake is legally his. There's no violation here." Boom. Game over. Lynette froze, jaw open, brain buffering. "That can't be right," she cried, sputtering about conspiracies, fake boundaries, neighborhood, fraught. The officer just shook his head and gently told her this was a civil matter, not criminal. And that's when the real show began. When the law doesn't bend your way, the petty will find another path. Suddenly I was fined for too shiny car paint, unruly grass, and excessively loud birds. Every notice bore Lynette's loopy signature and Dale's grainy photo evidence. Dale, by the way, had gone full 007 lurking around my yard at odd hours, hiding behind trees with binoculars, crouching behind cars with what looked like a lens from a 90s nature show, and once even aiming some sci-fi dish out his upstairs window like he was trying to tap into my thoughts. It was like a bad spy movie had moved into my front lawn. One night I caught him squatting behind my garbage bins in camo when I waved. He panicked, tripped over a recycling bin, and ran off like he'd seen a ghost, leaving behind his binoculars and a notebook full of scribbles that looked like encrypted nonsense. The next morning I found the notebook on my driveway pages filled with logs of my day, written in what could only be described as code cracked during a cartoon marathon. But the crown jewel of Lynette's descent came when I opened my front door and found a massive hand-drawn map taped to it, her official HOA Fantasyland, drawn in red marker with boundaries she'd just made up, slicing my land in half and labeling the Lake Community District waters. She'd even added fake legal citations and landmarks that didn't exist. It was so detailed it was almost impressive if it wasn't completely deranged. I stood there holding her masterpiece of madness, torn between laughing or feeling bad for someone clearly untethering from reality, and that's when it hit me. You don't defeat delusion with arguments, you crush it with truth. I pulled out my phone, took photos of her DIY fantasy map, and opened my laptop. It was time to go nuclear with facts. Lynette had no idea the official satellite imagery and archived land records would obliterate her red marker fairy tale like a storm hitting sidewalk chalk. I spent the day pulling up property records that most people don't even know exist. One click later, green lines lit up the screen. Official state maps told the truth loud and clear. My land, my lake, my dock, HOA. Tyranny dies in the face of receipts. The satellite imagery was so precise I could see individual trees, parked cars, driveway cracks, and even the wooden post I had installed just hours earlier. There was zero ambiguity, no gray area, and certainly no way Lynette's fantasy map could survive against this level of undeniable proof. I downloaded high-resolution satellite captures, state-stamped surveys, and historical boundary records, all showing the truth. The HOA had been living off decades of false assumptions, mostly because no one had ever cared enough to dig through the actual records before inventing rules. But I wasn't ready to drop the hammer just yet. Part of me wanted to hit send, to end the whole charade. But the smarter part wanted to watch the lie unravel, to see how far they'd take it, what drama they'd conjure if they still thought I was just another quiet neighbor without a spine. I had a hunch Lynette and Dale weren't done, and I wanted their next move in full detail before playing my ASO. I made a quiet investment, a top-tier home security system with motion sensors, HD night vision, audio recording, and real smartphone alerts, all discreetly positioned across my property with special focus on the lakefront where my dock work was underway. By the time I finished mounting the final cam above the shoreline, I thought, if these clowns even breathe too close, I'll have it in 108 OP. While I set up digital defenses, I also started some old-school sleuthing into Lynette and Dale's background, and wouldn't you know it, this wasn't their first HOA rodeo. Both had been booted from previous communities after residents complained of harassment, fraudulent citations, and misusing HOA funds. There was even a 3-year-old local news piece about a civil suit for fabricated violations and pocketing community dues. A pattern emerged. These two had turned HOA boards into personal fiefdoms, migrating from neighborhood to neighborhood like petty tyrants with a new hobby of control. They weren't just annoying volunteers on a power trip, they were repeat offenders with a polished playbook of psychological warfare, made-up citations, phony emergencies, hijacked meetings, and fear-based smear campaigns. What they didn't know was that I'd dealt with serial abusers of power before, and I knew how to compile evidence that held up in court, not just a Facebook group. As fate would have it, Lynette had started spinning her own operation just as I fortified. My neighbors began stopping by, not to argue, but to ask questions. They'd heard wildly conflicting stories. Mrs. Peterson brought cookies and carefully tiptoed into lake ownership questions. Someone else asked about shoreline access mid-dog walk, and then Janet Morrison from down the block came by with that polite but concerned tone people get when they're caught between gossip and guilt. Lynette said, "You're planning a resort with boat tours?" she asked, visibly unsure. I showed Janet and the others my permits, my property documents, my plain intentions, but I could see it in their eyes. Lynette's whispers were working. Her lies had sprouted roots, and papers alone wouldn't be enough to yank them out. So I took these conversations as an opportunity to plant truth with calm precision. I explained I had no interest in building fences. No entry fees, no public bans. All I want is to fish in peace, not run a damn marina. Slowly, neighbors relaxed. Some were even supportive, but Lynette's fog of paranoia still lingered. a low static of doubt beneath everything. That's when Mrs. Allen, the quiet widow from the corner house, came by while I tested the cameras. She was soft-spoken, shaking slightly as she held my documents, and then, voice cracking, told me, "You're the first person who's ever stood up to them. They made me rip out my lavender garden after 40 years because they said someone might sneeze." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my dock. This was a community under siege by small-time tyrants, and I just happened to be the first one armed well enough to push back. That night I composed an email to the entire neighborhood, attaching the satellite images, inviting anyone to come see the facts for themselves. I kept the tone friendly, open, factual, and by midnight, the responses began rolling in. Neighbors, shocked to learn the truth, relieved to see documentation, and angry they'd been misled. But as my inbox filled with support, my security app lit up with a motion alert at 11:47 p.m. Two figures creeping near the dock. One slender and female, the other short and stocky, their silhouettes unmistakable. I grabbed coffee and settled into my chair, ready to watch the most incriminating footage I could ever hope for. They came to bury me in lies, but ended up digging their own grave. That same evening, Lynette had called a surprise HOA emergency meeting. Roughly 20 people attended, and what unfolded was a Broadway-level performance of manipulation and fearmongering. "We are facing a threat to our community," Lynette declared like she was standing on a battlefield, pacing like a trial lawyer while Dale sat up front, waving fake news articles and nodding like a bobblehead. She claimed I was turning the lake into a commercial operation, said I was building without consent, and warned I'd soon be charging kids to feed the ducks. Yes, really. She had charts, doctored testimonials, and phony photos, spinning a tale where I was some real estate mogul planning boat slips, tour guides, and pay-to-play access. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in the back, checking my cameras and watching her dig deeper into delusion every time someone asked a fair question. Lynette jumped in with hearsay and accusations while Dale creepily snapped photos of me like he was compiling a mugshot collage. He even stood up and claimed he'd been tracking behavioral patterns and had data on my activities. Paranoia isn't evidence, it's just fear with a graph. As the meeting dragged on, her claims spiraled into a fever dream. I was allegedly working with condo developers, turning the lake into a club, even plotting property tax hikes. Dale backed her with printouts of random articles about lake pollution and building collapses, as if any of it connected to a man building a 12-foot dock. When it all wrapped up, I headed home, turned on every feed, and waited. At 11:30 p.m., my motion sensors lit up again, and there they were, Lynette and Dale creeping out of the tree line, dressed like cartoon burglars, toolbox in hand, crouching behind bushes and whispering like B-list spies. I watched as Dale began dismantling parts of my dock while Lynette instructed, "Make it look like a construction failure." Her voice, crisp.com, practiced. Dale nervously asked what they'd do if I reported it, and Lynette, chillingly smooth, said, "We'll say we warned him. We've got the violations on file. No one will question us." It was clear they'd rehearsed this sabotage and cover story like a scripted play, from the fake concern to the false trail of paperwork. And if I hadn't had cameras, tomorrow I'd be the one blamed for an accident that never happened. What they didn't realize was they weren't sabotaging a dock, they were filming their own downfall in HD. The audio was so crisp you could hear every breath of their scheming, every creak of metal as they loosened bolts, every whispered grunt as they sabotaged my dock, and every arrogant chuckle as they plotted their clean getaway. So vivid, I could practically smell the sweat on Dale's nervous palms. The video was even sharper, clear enough to read serial numbers on their tools. Catch the sly smirk on Lynette's face as she admired their handiwork, and freeze-frame the exact second they congratulated themselves for what they thought was the perfect crime. What they didn't know was they'd just filmed their own confession in full high definition, complete with timestamp verification that would make denial legally impossible. But I wasn't going to detonate that evidence just yet. No, I let them believe their little plan had worked, at least for now. So the next morning, I strolled out to inspect my mysteriously collapsed dock like any concerned homeowner would, snapped detailed photos, contacted my insurance to report potential defects, and called the city for a structural inspection, setting the stage for what I already knew would be the unraveling of their entire operation. Sure enough, by 8 a.m. Lynette was already making the rounds like a politician on scandal patrol, dragging Dale door to door with his DSLR camera and a folder stuffed with printed photos of the dock damage, spinning a tale of my dangerous incompetence. To anyone who'd listened, this could have injured children or pets, she told Mrs. Peterson, all faux concern and trembling voice. We warned him, but he wouldn't listen. Dale, with the swagger of a man pretending to be an engineer, backed her up with phony analysis claiming faulty foundations, untreated wood, and substandard design, despite the fact that his background was in accounting, not marine architecture. But while they peddled their lies, I was preparing the hammer drop. I sent an email to the entire neighborhood mailing list, inviting everyone to a community meeting at my house that evening. Subject line: ownership proof and vandalism footage. All welcome, with attached satellite imagery, deeds, surveys, permits, and a polite warning about suspicious activity that every resident should be aware of. The response was immediate. Within 2 hours, over 30 households are SVPED. Many with questions about the discrepancies between the HOA's claims and my official documents, and several admitted they'd long suspected Lynette and Dale of overreach but never had proof until now. That evening, my living room was filled with nearly 40 people, more than any HOA meeting in years, and I kicked it off by displaying the government satellite maps on my TV, walking them through the unmistakable boundary lines showing the lake, entirely within my private property, and addressing every question they had about water rights, environmental law, and public access with calm, evidence-based clarity. Then came the nuclear moment. I said, "Now, before I show you this next part, I want to make clear, these cameras were installed only to protect my home after repeated harassment. What they captured ... was unexpected." I played the video, and silence fell. At first, only Lynette's voice whispering instructions, then the image of her and Dale crouched like cartoon villains in the dark, unscrewing bolts, muttering about making it look like a structural failure, followed by her now infamous line, "We'll say we tried to warn him. Our violation notices are already on record." Gasps filled the room. Mrs. Peterson had both hands over her mouth. Mr. Williams shook his head like he'd just seen a ghost. Even Lynette's old supporters looked stunned, betrayed, furious. But what happened next was even more powerful. Residents began sharing their own stories of petty tyranny and humiliation under Lynette and Dale's HOA rule, being banned from planting vegetables, being fined for flags on weekdays, being forced to repaint patios that interfered with neighborhood energy flow. Mr. Riley stood up, voice trembling. "I've lived here 20 years and I've never felt smaller than I did under their rule. I let them tear us down, and I said nothing." The room came alive with truth. People who had once been strangers were suddenly united in outrage, recounting years of intimidation, phony citations, and rules invented on the spot to control whoever questioned authority. The veil had dropped, and what emerged was a portrait of two individuals who'd used their HOA positions as instruments of fear, creating a dual system of selective enforcement, rewarding loyalists, punishing dissent, weaponizing aesthetics, and false environmentalism as cover for control. And yet, amid the anger, something else stirred solidarity. Within minutes, residents formed new committees to audit HOA finances, review governance, and implement reforms to protect everyone from future abuse. Mr. Williams, the man fined for his garage door's shade of beige, gripped my shoulder and said through misted eyes, "Thank you for doing what I couldn't. I've been afraid to plant flowers for 3 years." Mrs. Peterson added her own tale, forced to remove a bird feeder because Dale claimed it attracted non-native species, while young families spoke of their children being scolded for laughing too loud during imaginary quiet hours that weren't in any. The legal implications of the sabotage video were severe. Multiple residents with law degrees offered to assist in pursuing both civil and criminal action, citing not just trespassing and vandalism, but also a clear pattern of retaliatory harassment and conspiracy to commit fraud. That night, the narrative flipped completely. From me being painted as a greedy developer to the community rallying around a homeowner who had exposed systemic corruption. And just 1 week later, the largest neighborhood meeting in history took place inside the community clubhouse. 47 of the 52 households represented, including elderly residents who hadn't attended anything in years but now felt compelled by justice. The mood was focused. Not angry. Residents weren't there to scream, but to rebuild. And when Lynette and Dale walked in, side by side, visibly aged and hollow-eyed, whispers swept the room. Dale looked like a deflated balloon, while Lynette clutched a briefcase and a stack of printouts, her gaze hardened but nervous. They sat in the front row, quietly mumbling to one another while Dana Wells, the new voice of reason in the neighborhood, opened the meeting with a direct mission. "Tonight is about accountability and truth. No more fear, no more fiction." Dana walked through the timeline from my legal doc project to the moment Lynette and Dale were caught in the act, supported by law, evidence, and community frustration, while also highlighting how their actions had not only violated multiple HOA codes but also likely state laws. Then came Lynette's turn to speak, and in true fashion, she launched into a wildly revisionist sob story, painting herself as the victim of a witch hunt, saying she'd acted out of duty, not malice, and that their late-night sabotage was nothing more than a safety check gone wrong. She claimed damage was accidental, that their motives were pure, and that everything had been blown out of proportion, but the room wasn't buying it anymore. She didn't lose control, she lost the narrative, and with every denial, every dodged responsibility, the distance between her and the community only grew wider. Dale's defense was as weak as a folding chair in a windstorm. His voice trembled as he claimed he was just following Lynette's instructions and didn't fully grasp the legal consequences of their actions. "I thought we were protecting the community from someone trying to take advantage of us," he said, eyes darting around the room. "Lynette told me Graham was planning to commercialize the lake, and that we needed to document safety violations. For the children, it was the kind of excuse that might have worked if we didn't already have hours of HD footage showing them dismantling my dock like a pair of late-night burglars." The weight of the moment was clear, especially when several residents mentioned they'd already contacted law enforcement about pressing charges, but honestly, the verdict had been reached long before Dale spoke. The evidence was damning. The community had seen enough. When Dana Wells called for a formal vote to remove both Lynette and Dale from every HOA position, she didn't just cite the dock's sabotage. She laid out a timeline of years' worth of overreach, harassment, and abuse of trust. When the results came in 45 votes in favor, 0 opposed, and 2 abstentions, the room froze. Then one person clapped, then another, and suddenly the entire room erupted in applause. Lynette stared at the floor. Dale looked like he wanted to disappear. The vote on pursuing criminal charges was closer: 32 in favor, 13 opposed, 7 abstentions. Some neighbors preferred civil action or community service, but either way, their reign was over. That night, we did more than vote out to power-hungry neighbors. We voted in a new era. The community voted to completely restructure the HOA's role. We eliminated most of the petty regulations that had allowed Lynette's power trip to fester. From now on, the HOA would focus on practical things: road maintenance, snow removal, emergency communication. The new rules included term limits, mandatory approval for fines, and transparent financial reporting. We even built a formal appeals process for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. Dana Wells was unanimously elected HOA president. Her first acts, she rescinded every violation notice I'd been issued. Then she proposed an community fund to help rebuild my dock and compensate me for the harassment I'd endured. But the most beautiful gesture, the neighborhood voted to rename the lake Community Lake, and they asked me to help create shared access spaces around it, where everyone could enjoy the water without sacrificing private property rights. The shift was electric. In weeks, the fear and isolation that had blanketed our streets were replaced with genuine neighborly connection. No more fines for flag color violations or surveillance for daring to plant flowers. Instead, we got monthly potlucks, a community garden, and a neighborhood watch based on mutual trust instead of suspicion. Lynette and Dale packed up and left 3 months later. Quietly, no goodbye notes, just silence. And that silence was its own kind of healing. Their exit marked the beginning of what many call the neighborhood's golden era. Property values didn't rise because of HOA threats. They rose because the word got out. This was a place where people actually cared about each other. As for the legal aftermath, no courtroom drama. I accepted a settlement, financial compensation, and a written apology, both shared with the community. Lynette's was lawyer slick and hollow, but Dale's surprisingly human. He admitted he'd been manipulated and had let things go too far. 2 years after hammering in my first dock post, I was finally finishing something far more meaningful than a fishing platform. It had become a symbol of what happens when you don't let bullies write the ending. The dock now included a seating area where parents could watch their kids, a launch point for kayaks and canoes, and a little weatherproof library box full of books shared by neighbors. It had become a community project. A retired carpenter helped reinforce the dock's supports. The Petersons donated marine-grade lumber. Even the teens got involved, learning basic skills while logging service hours. But the most beautiful change was in the people. An elderly widow who once feared HOA retaliation joined us every evening, casting her line and sharing stories from her Minnesota childhood. Neighborhood kids, once scolded for laughing too loud, now played freely by the shoreline and helped tend the dock. Even old Mr. Henderson, a Vietnam vet who kept to himself, now taught them how to tie fishing knots. Patience is the most important part, he told them, his hands guiding theirs. Fish can sense when you're rushing. That's what this story had taught all of us. Dana kept her promise. The HOA became a service group, not a surveillance unit. We went from fear-based management to community-driven care. One crisp autumn afternoon, I saw 2 kids fishing beside Mrs. Allen. Laughter echoed across the water. That's when it hit me. Every neighborhood should have a place like this where people of all ages can connect over simple joys and shared stories. The dock dedication was held on a bright Saturday morning. Nearly the whole community came out. Even city officials showed up. The mayor gave a speech about how property disputes should be handled, not with threats and fear, but with facts, dialogue, and mutual respect. And when I finally stepped up to speak, I kept it simple. When I started this project, I said all I wanted was a place to fish. I never planned to lead a neighborhood transformation, but here we are. Laughter and applause followed. If I've learned anything, I continued, it's that sometimes the best way to protect what's yours is to share it with people who respect it. The lake still belongs to me legally, but in every way that matters it belongs to all of us. I looked out over the crowd, families, elders, kids holding tackle boxes. And in that moment, I knew the best revenge isn't rigid's rebuilding something so strong that no bully can tear it down again. 2 years later, I still get messages from people in other neighborhoods asking how to fight back against abusive HOA leadership. My answer: document everything, study the facts, then let the truth do what intimidation never can: unite good people. Because when the facts are clear and your motives are honest, You don't need to shout, you just need to show up, stand firm, and share the doc. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Thanks for watching another RiseFuel original. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one, and remember, true power isn't in revenge, it's in rising above. Asterisk, subscribe and stay fueled for justice.